Hello there, friends out there in YouTube land. This is Charlie from Cornet Charlie, and I'd like to share about something that I think is a very important element of our religious lives and our spiritual lives. And that subject is the subject of worship. Worship. In John chapter 4, Jesus, the Messiah, has a confrontation with a woman at the well of Samaria, and explains a couple of things to her. One, he says that you do not know what you worship. We know what we worship. Speaking of those outside of the covenant of God, those Samaritans had a form of worship. They worshipped on a certain place in a certain way. Just about every kind of religious belief has some form of worship. A prescribed form, a correct form, something that engages the mind and the heart. I think it's very important to know that true worship is something that we do. There can be something that has the guise of worship, or a feigned worship, which is just participating in as an audience, as somebody else performs an act of worship. But whether that be a worship band or a worship chorus or a hymn or whatever it may be, how much are we engaged personally? How much do we know what we worship? And also Jesus says to this woman in Samaria, "My Father seeks such true worshipers to worship him in spirit and in truth." Now this is a very deep spiritual nugget. If we go to another teaching in the gospel, we see that Jesus Christ says that out of the abundance of the heart, we have a treasure in our heart. So worship is about the treasure of our heart. It's out of the abundance of those treasures, whether it's based upon materialism or worldly things, or whether it be based upon spiritual and heavenly things, our mouth is going to give forth of that. The heart is really the repository for our affections. So out of the affections of our heart, our mouth is able to speak. True worship is what we have accumulated in our heart, whether either to extol the works of God, the goodness of God, or to be set upon earthly things. True worshipers are set upon godly things. I'll share a little bit about a testimony I heard about 20 years ago from a young woman, not so young. Her name was Katina Nicholas. She was a former prostitute and drug addict. Her genealogy was Greek, so she knew something about the Greek language. She gave an illustration of worship which I think is so meaningful to me, because it expresses the depth of the meaning of worship. She recalls that the word that is used for worship in the Bible, in the New Testament, is proskuneo. Proskuneo. And the picture, she said, of that word is a dog that is licking the master's hand. A dog licking the master's hand. So this dog represents a being that is so dependent upon the master. It represents a being who, without the master, would be wild, uncared for, underfed. Its fur would be all full of matter. It's not taken care of. It's not curried. It's not cleaned. So this is a miserable cur unless the master cares for it. In gratitude, in the depth of this affection it has for the master, we realize that our life, in the fullness of our life, entirely depends upon the gift that the master brings. So it's out of a deep gratitude. It's out of a deep understanding of without him, I would be just a mangy cur and roaming the streets, fighting with the other dogs. So I like that image. There's all kinds of forms of worship. There's hymn singing. There's recited prayers. Some people say that every moment of our life is worship, but I'm not entirely sure that that encompasses the act of worship. The act of worship is a connection of spirit to spirit, God's spirit to our spirit. It takes several forms, but it must be personal. It must come from us. It must be from the heart. And that, I believe, is a key understanding to worship. We worship what we love and desire and have the greatest affection for. We realize that the transformation of the Spirit has an eternal consequence. For those who are not transformed, for those who are still struggling with the lusts of the flesh and the bondages to this world and its various values, its various appetites, they can only imagine worship. They can't participate in it. Worship, I believe, is not a spectator sport, although in many churches worship has become something where the audience can applaud the worshipers and so on, or the worship team. It's got to be more personal than that. Well, this is Charlie. I'm saying thank you for the time that you've shared with me today. You can give some thought to this. What is a true worshiper? The Father seeks those to worship Him. See you later.